Christian Parenting.
As we continue our series on shepherding a child's heart, we're going to talk about the role of service and generosity in shaping our families. I'm joined today by my special guest, Stephen Argue, professor of youth and family culture at Fuller Theological Seminary. You're in for a great discussion today.
I think the conversations in motion are the better conversations. In the car, 5 minutes before one goes to bed. I think those type of things start small conversations. And then I think when you do have the bigger conversations, they don't seem so dramatic or out of left field.
I'm Jay Holland, and I want to welcome you to Let's Parent on Purpose. This is a podcast for parents who want to thrive and not just survive their parenting years. Each week, I'll bring you an insight or an interview that will help strengthen your marriage, your parenting skills, or your personal walk with Jesus. If you like what you hear, you can subscribe, share it with your friends. Go to letsparentonpurpose.com for more details. And if you really like it, you can sign up for my Things for Thursday email and get a copy of my Fun Family Conversations ebook by texting the word THINGS, THINGS, to 66866. I am personally enjoying this series, Shepherding a Child's Heart. It's been a good, convicting, and gentle reminder, depending on what the subject is, of my role as a shepherd in my home with my children. And today we're going to talk about a subject that I think is one of the most formative. I've been doing student ministry for over 20 years, and I can tell you that this is one of the most formative character concepts that we can focus on in our children. And before it happens in the church, it really does need to happen within our house. As we talk today, I'm joined by Stephen Argue of the Fuller Theological Seminary. He has a hybrid role there of assistant professor of youth, family, and culture, as well as applied research strategist, which is a super awesome, fancy title. Stephen also has co-authored a book called Growing With, along with Kara Powell, who was a guest of mine recently on Let's Parent on Purpose. Listen in and be encouraged today as we talk through not only the importance, but some very practical strategies for helping grow a heart of service and generosity in our children that goes beyond just events and becomes a way of life. I especially love towards the end as Stephen refocuses us on the role of the identity that we start with, the Genesis 1 versus Genesis 3 identity. To me, that was encouraging and convicting, and I think it will be to you as well. So I hope you grow and are encouraged by this conversation with Stephen Argue. Steve, thanks so much for joining me today. How are you out in California?
Hey, Jay, thanks so much for having me on. We're doing great, and it's great to spend a little time with you.
Yeah, I very much appreciate it. I had your colleague, Kara Powell, on recently, and we talked about sticky faith. And in the conversation, she was telling me about a book that she co-authored with you called Growing Young. Would you care to give a quick overview of what Growing Young is all about?
Yeah, and I'm so glad you had Kara on the air. Isn't she great? It's such a thrill to work with her. Yeah, I did have a chance to co-author a book that we called Growing With, and it really comes off the research that we did with another book at the Fuller Youth Institute called Growing Young. And Growing Young was a study that we did really looking at the ways that churches are finding success with really nurturing young people in their churches. A lot of times we hear the narratives that young people are leaving the church or nobody likes the church. But we wanted to just do an exemplary study on finding churches that were actually doing fairly well and young people saying that the churches were really helping them. And out of that, which was really interesting, is we found that there was some unique commitments that were essential for that for churches. But there was another unique element that came out of that, and that was the parenting relationship with the child. And so, good research always not only answers a few questions, but it raises more, right? So
Right.
we decided to say, well, okay, so what is it about parenting that we need to be thinking about. And there's a lot of books we find with parents when kids are younger. And we also have found that when parents with younger kids, they tend to talk with each other more. Like, how do you do that? I'm really failing at this. But we find that as our kids get older, we start to feel almost self-conscious about our parenting. And
Mm.
what we've found as we've talked with parents is that there's this isolating effect that happens, a competition effect that happens. And all of a sudden we uh, sort of hole up in our own sort of zones, trying to figure out what to do with our kids. And that's a very overwhelming, scary, lonely place for a lot of parents. A lot of them that are probably even listening to your podcast right now. And I guess if I could say anything before we jump into giving more advice, as though parents need more advice, sometimes it always feels like we back up the truck and it's one more thing that we don't know what we're doing. I just think it's good for us to remind parents that, hey, we know you love your kids. You're not alone. We hope that you take intentional steps to help your kids and continue to grow yourself. But the parenting is one of the hardest things. I mean, Kara and I talk about this all the time. It's one of the hardest things we've ever done. It's just it's crazy and hard and beautiful and wonderful and daunting and tiring all at the same time. And I think especially as our kids get older, we think about that. So this idea of growing with was really really important because we don't necessarily, as parents, just tell our kids what to do. There's something that's changing in us as parents as well. And so the growth is not just to get our kids better, but it's actually our own transformation as well. And there's nothing more sanctifying, I think, in my life than my parenting. It just exposes the good parts of me and the ugly parts of me. And I don't know. I don't want to get too. Hopefully, I don't have to reveal too much of my downsides as a parent on this podcast because it's really embarrassing. But we've all had those moments, right? So that's what growing with is. And so growing with, the way we define it is this: it's a mutual journey of intentional growth for both ourselves and our children that trust God to transform us all. So it's a mutual journey, right? It's something where we continue our working on bridging the relational distance between our kids and us because our lives are changing. And it's intentional growth in that we sort of have to be intentional about the way that we parent. The moment that we sort of start coasting or thinking that we've got it figured out, or in some cases give up, is the moment that we begin to take our eye off the ball. And as our kids are changing, we are as well for both ourselves as children, of course, and then trusting that God transforms us all. There is this beautiful transformative process where I think that God uses our relationships with our kids to make us all better and to make the world better. And I know we're going to talk about service in a second, but I think that's really where it sort of roots from. So the book really focuses on parenting adolescents and then what we would call emerging adults or young adults, really the 13 up to 29. And there's just, I'll say one more thing about the book, and I know we want to talk about some other things, but I just talk with a lot of parents that their kid turns 18 and they think their work is done, and all of a sudden they realize that their kids need them in new ways, and they realize that the parenting isn't done. And so all these new questions are emerging for a lot of parents today about what does it mean for me to be a mom or dad or a stepmom or a stepdad to my 18, 19, 21, 25, 24, 28-year old. And those are really, really important questions that I think we're trying to address in the book. And so if you're in that boat, we're with you. And we hope that maybe this can help you.
Yeah, yeah, I have a daughter that just turned 18, last month,
Yeah.
and it was probably, like, 2 years ago as I was thinking frantically through all of the things that were not yet formed in her and how much of a failure I was because here comes 18 and there's no way that it's gonna be done by then. And then I
Yeah.
finally had the realization of, "Wait a minute, when I was 18, I was a bit of a basket case across multiple areas, and so much happened to grow up over the next 15 years of my life."
Right.
I was still a child at 35, but I mean, there are some things that still hit us today. We're joking about it. Like when I shop for car insurance, I still feel like I'm pretending to be an adult sometimes. Like, no, this is a grown up. The amount of pride and insecurity that comes with parenting, it seems like the thing that people are often the least willing to ask for help about, which is just phenomenal because you grew up driving in a car, but when it was time for you to drive a car, you had to go through like, books and a mentoring process with somebody behind you and take a test. Now
Yeah.
you grew up with parents, but but there's no like test or anything like that for you to bring home a child into your house. It's just like you don't have to like the whole test is did you fly any flags from Child Protective Services where they would take your kid away? And if the answer is no to that,
Sure.
all of a sudden
Yeah.
you get this kid, but it doesn't mean that you know what you're doing. Um,
Yeah.
we can get really prideful in asking for help. Um, and and it changes from a baby to a toddler to a school age kid to a preteen to a teenager. You know, it's kind of like driving a car and flying a plane. Just because you can do one and there's some general concepts, it doesn't mean that everything translates. So I appreciate
It's
what
exactly right.
you're doing, to help lay some groundwork of, this is how you get help. This is how you analyze things. And so I'm sure you
Yeah.
guys have seen the same thing that just there's a lot of mystery to parenting as you go along.
Yeah, there's a lot of mystery, there's a lot of improvisation. I mean, I kind of feel like sometimes parenting is like those cooking shows where they give you 3 ingredients and you have to create something by the end of the day, and it's like I think that, at the end of the day, you're like, "Did it work? Maybe. I don't really know," right? And so I think we just gotta cut ourselves some grace, as parents, recognizing the fact that we love our kids, and I think deep down, they love us, and at the same time continue to work at being better parents. And this is sort of, it's in motion, right? What worked 2 weeks ago, especially when you have teenagers, doesn't necessarily work today. So
Right.
there's no secret sauce. You can't kind of crack the code on this. It's this attentiveness that comes along the way, and and then that really kind of expresses itself in a lot of different ways, right? And this is a lot of the topics that you're talking about with your podcast, right? Learning, faith, service, etc. All these things are expressions of that, and those take different forms based on age and relationship, and really where our kids are at and where we are at as well, right? So it's always a mutual journey, and that's the other thing that I think makes this scary as well is as we see our kids struggle or succeed, it has an impact on us, and for better or for worse. And I think our awareness of that helps us parent, because then we can really ask ourselves, what's going on inside? Am I really responding to something that my kid is doing, or am I responding to my own insecurities, my own past, my own pride, my own worries, et cetera, et cetera. And again, that gets back to the transformative thing where I think it's working in all of us in different ways. So,
Well, let's
yeah.
nail down on one particularly transformative character quality that I think that it's a long-term thing, it's not an event, but we're in the middle of a series here, Steve, on this podcast called Shepherding a Child's Heart. In reading through your book, one of the things that really stood out to me is you guys seem to get the role of serving and generosity, as a way of life in the transformative culture in a home and a church, and so I'd like to narrow our conversation now as we go forward into that and just first speak to what do you guys see in the families and in the homes and then how that translates out into the church where serving and generosity they've gone beyond being just a checklist thing or like we did an event once a year or when we were guilted into it to an identity within the home and family.
Yeah. Yeah. Thanks. I think that's a great question. So I think service and generosity, probably like any Christian discipline, comes with practice, right? I mean, Christian practices are exactly that,
Mhm.
practice. We try them again and again and again. And for those of us listeners that maybe come from a more liturgical tradition, we know this that there's almost something liturgical about that. The repetitiveness that comes with trying and doing things again and again allow us to appreciate the essence of in this case service or generosity, and why it is so important. We know in learning theory that sometimes we learn something and then we experience it, right? And there are other times though where we experience it and then eventually we find the language or the cognitive ability to actually articulate why that's so important, right? So sometimes I can serve and then I can make meaning of it, and other times I hear or read I ought to serve or love my neighbor, and then I find ways to do it. You see what happens? It works both ways. And so what's beautiful about, I think, families and the church is that I think we have communities that make this a priority and come back to that again and again. And this is what's really important for young people because, Jay, you just mentioned a while ago about this idea as parents, we're sort of building the plane as we fly it, right? I think for young people, I think they're building their lives as they try to live it. That they are trying to make sense of who they are, and that expression of who they are really dips into this idea of service. Unfortunately, we find in our culture a lot of times that like serving and one's career are almost completely separate. That we have, I do my job and then I do what I really love, or I do, this is my career, but then I try to volunteer on the side or whatever. But if we look at the scriptures and we look at, especially with young people, I think that there's this deeper ethic of asking ourselves, what is God calling us to? What is God calling us toward? How do we partner with God to make the world a better place? And what is the ways that we can do that? And so this idea of service and serving others, and this idea of generosity is really a transformative and growing force and current in our kids' lives that can really help them discover who they are, and also begin to have a better sense of the world as well. And this is really important for young people for a lot of different reasons. One is, I think that our kids live in a different world than when you and I did. I always tell adults, the phrase "when I was your age" is not a great way to start a sentence for a lot of different reasons. But one of them is this: is that I think sometimes adults think that because they were teenagers once, that they know who teenagers are today,
Mm.
and it doesn't mean that they weren't teenagers once and they didn't have teenage experiences. But our kids are living in a world that's radically different. And when it comes to service, I think what's really unique is this: is that they have a window to the globe in ways that we never did.
Mm.
We would find out about news or atrocities or wars or injustice in the newspaper days after, weeks after it happened. Where now, with social media and otherwise, we see in real time, um, the injustices in our world, the pain in our world, the the challenges in our world. And this, but for a young person, it asks a really, really deep and profound question: what am I supposed to do about that? Like, am I just supposed to like the post? Is that enough? Or like, what's there? There's something that, I think moves them in a powerful way, and I think they would need to know what to do, with that impulse in that moment. And I think as parents and as the church, I think these are opportunities for us as people that value service and loving neighbor to actually engage and talk to them about, the challenges across the street and around the world that they're working with, and really asking, well, what can they do, or how do we talk about this, or how can we think about this? So service has a number of levels associated with it, and like you said, I think just running off and doing a one-off mission trip or a one-off, service project, I mean, can have some value, I suppose, but I think there's something that's deeper that, is important there, and that is really asking ourselves, well, why are we doing this, and what is this doing to me, and why does God care about someone that's different than me, and what's my role in that, and what are these people's stories that I'm serving, and how do they affect me?
Mm.
All this is part of their identity development, and service is a way for them to look beyond themselves, to see other stories, and to draw a bigger picture of the world, I think.
Let's Parent on Purpose is being brought to you today in part by the Lazy Bear Cabin. This is a family vacation rental cabin in the beautiful Blue Ridge Mountains of Northwest Georgia. If you're looking for a special time to make memories with your family while still social distancing, consider this 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom log cabin with a hot tub, ping pong and pool tables, as well as a beautiful scenic view. You're just minutes away from hiking, biking, lakes, apple orchards, and the charming town of Blue Ridge, Georgia. And the Lazy Bear Cabin wants to partner with you to bless a deserving family that you love. Go to www.lazybearcabinrental.com and nominate a family to win a free 3-day, 2-night stay. And while you're there, consider booking a vacation for your own family. A couple of thoughts as you're talking. One, the vast difference when we were growing up of first, like we didn't read the newspaper, and if you weren't home at 6:30 p.m., you did not see the world. I read the sports section of the newspaper, and if I still had time, I read the comics. Literally, that was it. And our kid, like, as we're recording this a couple days ago, there was a massive explosion in Beirut. It was horrific. And we had youth the other day. My teens know about this. They can't do anything about it, but they know about it. And then you have protests around the country, and you have a
Right.
pandemic going on, and all of these things that they see. And I think it's raising the level of anxiety that they have because you okay, well, here's one more burden for you on. Here's one more burden, and you can't do anything. And so I think one of the things that we can do as moms and dads is help them talk about these things of like, what do you feel towards this? Like, if you could do something, what could you do? But also
Yeah.
helping them realize if you try to do something like there's in my neighborhood, there's a couple cars that I think have like every slogan painted on the side, every bumper sticker you could possibly have to protest every cause, and every slogan that you could possibly have to do there. And I'm pretty sure this person also does nothing to help any of these causes. It's like, virtue signaling at its finest, that as long as I look like I'm protesting, I'm not helping. But I think what we can do as parents is say, okay, we cannot directly help in Beirut right now, and we cannot help here, and we cannot help here. Where can we help? Because, it's kind of like the whole world is lost, but there's also unsaved people in my neighborhood, and there's unsaved people in my
Yeah.
school. And so if
Yeah.
I am a witness to the kid in my class, to the kid on my sports team, to my coworker at my part-time job, that's doing something about the brokenness of the world. And so,
I think that's great.
yeah, I think if we can help our kids realize that meaningful service on a very small level, first off, it does something for the whole sake of the world, but also it's
Mhm.
preparation because one day
Mhm.
they might be in a spot to help with meaningful service on a very grand scale. And so, there's
Yeah.
what is it? The Navy SEAL guy who gave the speech about like make your bed first thing in the morning, because if
Yeah.
you make your bed, you've accomplished one thing for the day. And I think we can do that with service of like, okay, let's start in the home. And this is where maybe
Yeah.
moms and dads will light up because they'll be like, yeah, my kid has a heart for every mission trip that the church has, but I can't get them to clean the room or run the vacuum. So
Yeah.
let's take this
Yeah.
first down to the most practical level possible. Let me use my family. My wife she's a workhorse in the in the sense, like, I don't want to be insulting. My wife is one of the hardest workers that I know. That doesn't necessarily translate to my kids being hard workers. And I think there's a lot of families that could say that. It's like, you know what? Mom and dad, we're generous with our money. And, mom and dad, they work very hard at serving, but it hasn't natural like it's not like my kids have just watched me serve and they've automatically started serving. There has to be a call into it that happens. And so how can we as parents translate the things that have already been built in us into our children? Let's start with service. How can we do that?
Yeah, those are great questions. So, let me give you some examples. First of all, and I know you're not saying this, Jay, but let's not underestimate just the modeling that happens. I mean, our kids can smell hypocrisy as better than anybody, right? So, I think the ways that as parents we live out our own convictions is really great. I mean, as some researchers would say, parents get who they are, not what they tell their
Yeah,
kids to be,
yeah.
right? Like, so I think there's let's not underestimate that. But I think what you're saying, and I think this is what's really important about what you're saying, is I think sometimes our kids need us to translate why we're doing what we're doing, right? It's not just what we're doing, it's why we're doing it. And there are moments, I think, where we can have those type of conversations with our kids of saying, for example, like let's just say giving, right? Like, every Sunday you see that, we put the money in the plate or however you give or
Right.
whatever. Do you know why we do that? Like, do you want to talk about that a little bit? Let me tell you why that's important to us, right? Now, what you're doing is you're connecting the action with at least for them something to think about. And it
Right.
doesn't mean that all of a sudden they're going to magically do that, but all of a sudden, as they're getting older, they're asking this really, really important question that we as parents sometimes hate. That's why, right? Well, why do you do that? Why, why? Think of why questions as meaning making questions and our kids connecting the dots.
That's
They're not trying to catch us doing anything wrong. They actually are trying to build their life as they're living it. And they're asking another question as they're getting older: do I want that for my life or not? And we hope that they do, because we think they're good, but they may look at it differently, or they may take longer for them to get there. And I think that's okay. Here's some other practical things that I think are really helpful. One is, I don't think parents nor kids like big talks about heavy things.
No.
So I don't think like saying, "Hey kids, we're gonna have a meeting every Saturday night at 7 and we're going to talk about heavy service things," like, or however you do it, like that would just not be a good idea, right? I think the conversations in motion are the better conversations, in the car, 5 minutes before one goes to bed, over a, a meal. Hey, did you see that? What do you think about that? Maybe, what if we were to just pray right now, right? I think those type of things start small conversations, and then I think then when you do have the bigger conversations, they don't seem so dramatic or out of left field, right?
Yeah.
So, and I think those can be the easy wins. That's the make your bed moment, right? I mean, have a have a 2-minute conversation with your kid about something in the news. Okay, that
Mhm.
would be really great. My daughter, when she was still in high school, she and I drove into town together. I teach at a seminary and at school, and so she would drop me off, which was easier for me. And we would talk in the car, and we would just ask each other. It just turned into a sort of a regular habit of us of saying, "Hey, what's going on with you today? What can I pray for you?" And she'd ask me, and we developed this habit of just sort of talking about our lives. And then I was typically the one that would pray, but I would always end our prayer with saying, "And God, may we live our lives today in such a way that we make the world a better place." And so there was one day, and now we've gotten to know each other a little better on the podcast, and if we're like 10 minutes in, I can tell you about how terrible of a parent I am. I was in a bad mood, and I know that none of you parents are ever in bad moods, but I was in a bad mood in the morning, and I don't know why. And I just did not ask her what she was doing that day, And we just, you just sometimes don't feel like praying when you're in a bad mood, even with your kid. And what's so interesting is she knew something was up, and she grabbed my hand and she just said, "God, I want to pray for Dad today, and I pray that we may live our lives today in such a way that we make the world a better place."
Mm.
And I thought, I got out of the car just kind of tearing up a little bit, but I'm kind of like, I don't know what my daughter kind of service she's going to do, or I don't know what her generosity is just going to look like, but she is learning to look at the world and asking God, how can I make the world a better place? And I'm like, I'll take that any day. Now, I can give you 100 ways that failed as a
Yeah.
parent, but that was a moment where, like, you just hold on to those moments, and you kind of go, there was something that was happening over time that made that um, really, really valuable and meaningful. So, I think little conversations are good. Repetition is
Mhm.
good. That consistency is really good. I think that those type of things can be really, really helpful. And then I'll say one more thing, and then you can ask me some more questions. But and we've already referred to it a little bit. Is I think that there are ways. I'll give you. No, I'm going to give you two different examples. And something else that my wife Jen and I we've been pretty consistent with our kids is this: is we tell our kids as they grew up that no one's left behind. And what we meant by that was just this: is they had their friend groups and they invited kids over to our home or whatever. We always said, okay, who else can you invite?
Mm.
We've really tried to stay away from cliques and trying to kind of say, what does it mean to be generous in our relationships?
That's good.
And that really became a value for our kids. And then the what coupled with that was we just it's something that we would pray as a family when we would move into a new home, and it was something that we told our kids all the time. Is that we just said our home is a safe and hopeful and positive zone. That here's the place that we speak well of each other, and where your friends are always welcome. And they are welcome here in any time, any way. And our kids actually tested us on that, and we believed it. And so our home is a place where kids would just show up.
Mm.
So we had to work really hard to keep the refrigerator full, but they would just come over, and you've made it somewhere with kids when they just kind of walk into the fridge, to the kitchen, and open the fridge on their own without asking, right? And we're okay with that. But I think that a lot of kids don't feel comfortable bringing their kids home because they feel like it's not a it's an anxious place
Yeah.
or it's an unsafe place. But we just wanted our kids to know that, like, we want you to be generous with your home, with your time, with your friendships. That those small ways of thinking about the other can make a difference in the way you help your peers and the way that you live yourself. And I think that that begins to turn into a generosity that we see in our kids today and the way they think about their relationships, which I think could be really, really powerful. Then finally, the one other thing I think we just keep in mind, I think we talk about this in the book as well, is our colleague Pam King talks about this idea of crucibles of transformation, like the moments that we serve and opportunities, um, to not make those one-offs, but to actually think about, especially as parents, the process of serving, talking about what you're going to do before you do it. Like, what are we doing when we go to the soup kitchen, or we pack lunches for the homeless, or whatever it might be. What exactly is happening here, and what are the stories behind that? Like, what are we prepared for? And then there's the actual act for them to actually think about. Well, what am I feeling and experiencing in the moment? And then there's the debrief afterward. Tell me what you thought.
Mm,
What was exciting? What was scary? What would you do differently now that you've done it one time? And if you went back, what would be a different question you would ask? You see, what you're doing is you're taking this idea of service and generosity and you're turning it into a process that they actually are reflecting on, that actually will create deeper roots than just saying, well, I served at a soup kitchen, right? There's not, I mean, that's great, but that's not transformative necessarily, because it turns into a lot of times just an item that we put on our college application, rather than an act that we're trying to embed deeper in our persons, right? So I think those things can be really, really helpful and powerful in small ways anyway.
let me ask you about something that I have been guilty of. I try to catch myself on, and I can think of an instance where I screwed this up in the last 10 days. As a parent, I know that I'm supposed to praise the behavior that I want. And so when I see my child doing something generous, I'm supposed to praise it. When I see them serving, I want to praise it. Temptation sometimes, and this can be with parents, like as kids get involved in youth group and serving and mission trips and everything. Well, you just want to do that because you want to be with your friends. Where we're critiquing their motives behind it, we're kind of calling out their heart. And while it
Yeah,
may be true, we're pouring cold water on it. I can think of like I did this on just like I blew it, and I don't know if my son noticed later. We had a hurricane, well, it was like a Cat 1 down here that was supposed to land in Florida a
yeah,
couple weeks ago. Part of what we do as our church is we run around and we shut shutters for the old people in our church, and typically in Florida, nobody even gets out of their chair before it's a Cat 3, but we have a couple older people that were scared, so my son and I were gonna
yeah,
I called my, 10-year-old, and I was like, "Let's go, we're gonna go help Miss Betty shut her shutters." And he's like, "Can we go get a Frosty afterwards?" Because in his mind, the last time that we went out and worked and we spent, a couple hours putting up shutters for different people, then we went and got ice cream. And so he was all in, and I poo-pooed that, like, "No, we're not getting ice cream, we're going to serve."
uh-huh,
But, like, I kinda blew an opportunity that was already there of, like, he had a positive correlation with service
yeah.
that if I would just reinforce, the Lord can work out the motives over time, but how would you encourage parents to even if they see mixed motives in the service, to fan the flame of what's good in there?
Yeah, well, I mean, if we're really honest, we all have mixed
Yeah,
motives, right? So, I mean, I just think there's sort of a an honesty that comes with that, and we're all sort of in process. And I mean, I think we just have to remember that service has so many layers too, right? There's the service of helping others, but there's also something about doing it together. Like serving and Frosty with you and your son, to him, that was basically the same
yeah,
thing. Certainly, he loves Frosties, I'm sure, but time with dad,
right.
that's pretty golden, right? I think with kids, I think we have to be careful to not discourage their actions and praise them for the good that they're doing in the world. And then I think as they get older, I think we do process, why we're doing what we're doing, and to have those important conversations. Like, I mean, sure. I mean, I think as a kid gets older, I think they may do things because their friends want to do that, and at some point that runs into a problem. I remember with my daughter when she was going to go study overseas. And, I just had a really hard talk with her because she's like, I really want to go here because my friend, blah, 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 is going here. And I said, I don't think there's anything wrong with you wanting to go to study overseas with your friend. I said, but we have to start talking about what's important to you. And if the friendship is getting in the way of who you want to become, then I think you need to sort of think and question that a little bit, right? So, I think we know our kids well enough that we can begin to, sort of lean in on that a little bit. And, I think the other thing is this is, my theology says this is that I think as parents, we're often too quick to look at our kids through the lens of Genesis 3, where we see the sinfulness, right? And we get frustrated when they do things wrong. But the narrative of the scriptures start in Genesis 1. And what does Genesis 1 says? That we are created in God's image and we're very, very good,
Mm.
right? Certainly there's sin that needs to be addressed, but ultimately there is flashes of the divine in each of us, including our children. And I mean image bearingness, right? So, what I like to do as a parent, and I've made this mistake as well, is I'm really quick sometimes to call out their mistakes. But I think it's better to call out the wins, Jay, like you said. And when they do blow it, to instead of say, oh, there you go again, I knew you'd do that, or of course that's the way it is, to kind of say, I'm really surprised that you did that because that's not who I see you to be, right? So we're calling out the Genesis oneness in our children rather than beating them down with their Genesis 3-ness. Doesn't mean we don't talk about sin, but there's a deeper motive than just eradicating sin, right? It's to call them into the life of Jesus and this transformation that happens that God promises, right? So that's the beauty that we have as parents, is to cheer them on toward Jesus, not just have them run from sin, right? Or eradicate that. So there's a both and always associated with that. And I find that that's much more encouraging to a kid to call them out in who you see them to be rather than to just call out the things that they've done wrong. None of us like that. None of us really respond very well to that, I think.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything practical that I could ask that's more important than what you said about calling them into their identity as an image of God. Just want to thank you for being on here. And I want to ask, would you mind if we prayed for you and your family as we close?
Jay, would love that. Thanks again for having me on. And to all you parents out there, we're with you and God bless you. Don't give up.
All right, let's pray. Lord, I thank you for this conversation, for the gentle reminder in my heart to fan the flame of what I see good that God's doing in my children. Lord, I pray that for each of us listening, Lord, that we would call them into the image of God that's already there. Make that the focus. We do have to call out sin, but help us to make the focus to fan the flame of who God is creating them to be. And Lord, I pray specifically for Steve, for his role as a dad and a husband, Lord, with transitioning children in different stages of life, God, that you would give his family divine wisdom, Lord, that their each day would make the world be a better place. Lord, I pray as he works and interacts at the Fuller Seminary, training the next generation who are going to lead churches and missions institutions around the world. Lord, give him divine wisdom. Help them to figure out how to educate in this new COVID pandemic. We know that you're not limited by circumstances, by the things that we think are blocking our way. So, Lord, I pray that you would lighten Steve's heart, help him to see how you are moving in the midst, not just in spite of, but in the midst of all of the situations and circumstances that they're wrestling through. And Lord, help us to be good dads and good moms, and to walk in grace with ourselves, just as we do with our kids. And we pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.
Friend, I want to thank you so much for listening today. I pray it's been a blessing to you. And if it has, a couple things I would ask of you. Number one, share it with somebody else so that you can bless them. And number two, if you believe in the ministry and the Lord has put you in a place to support, would you consider becoming a regular supporter of Let's Parent on Purpose, or a one-time giver if that's the spot you're in? You can do so by going to letsparentonpurpose.com, and in the top right corner, click the little Give Donate button and become a part of our Patreon support community or a one-time giver. This is Jay Holland, thanking you so much for joining, reminding you there's all kinds of back issues and archives at Let's Parent on Purpose and ChristianParenting.org for you to explore. And I just want to remind you, parenting is a marathon, not a sprint. We'll talk to you soon.